We're creative problem solvers. We've made things over the years that do things that our bodies can't do or that help us do them easier. We call them tools. Our tools have helped change the balance of the biological game playing out in the world over the past few 100,000 and millions of years. In the beginning, our tools were very closely related to our survival, ancient camping and hunting equipment. Modern tools can include automatic potato peelers, in-home automatic soap dispensers, and who knows what else you can find wandering around at any given modern home store. But they include lots of other things we perhaps forget are tools because they're so tightly intertwined into the design of society that they seem like human necessities. And there are several real problems with tools, or maybe it's better to just call them dangers. They're not always a net benefit to our lives because in using the tool, we become the tool, and it shifts our perspective away from human perspectives on value. They change our lives, and we grow accustomed to that change and then feel strange without it, hence the feeling of something being a necessity in society. That isn't the same thing as improving our lives. They also have a cost. It costs something to make them, it costs something to use and maintain them, it costs something to create a world in which they're useful in. It costs something to get rid of them. We pay some of those costs individually and some of them as a shared cost of society, depending on the tool. We think of those costs traditionally in an economic sense, but those aren't the only costs that we pay. As individuals, we pay the costs of externalization, namely abstraction, and it can be more individually damaging than you think to move the cost of doing something off of ourselves and onto something else. In this case, the tool. The pattern of externalization comes with dangers that if we aren't conscious of, can trick us into thinking something is more valuable to us than it actually is. It can limit our growth by hiding the fundamental first principles of whatever we're doing away from us. Tools are a type of abstraction. They take an energetic transaction in the world and they modify it in some way so that you're doing something different than you were before. If you're never exposed to the more primary experience, it's likely you'll miss the true understanding of what it is you're doing. True understanding often involves doing things yourself and experiencing the emotions of the action as well as the action and reaction of reality. Abstractions and tools as abstractions also shift perspectives. In the case of tools, from a human perspective into a tool-based one. There's a great quote in the German TV series Dark, which I could use in every video I publish. We're not free in what we do, because we're not free in what we want. Most everything I can think of can be seen as having some want to its existence. Tools are the same. Your car wants something from you. Do you know what it is? The people that design it and sell it do. Your mobile phone absolutely wants something from you. Have you considered what you want from it? If not, the tool is going to stop being something you've chosen to help you achieve your values in life and become the full expression of what it wants. None of these things are definite outcomes of using tools. They're just potential problems when we haven't first strongly considered what our values are in life, what we need to actually do in the world to strengthen the expression of our values, and just as critically but tragically overlooked by most, the other side of the same coin, what we need to avoid to express things that run counter to our values. That mission might as well be the psychological meaning of life. And once we have our own desired path established, we have to deeply consider the tools we're using. What outcome is it going to make more likely in our lives? In other words, what is its design? And what new requirements does it have for us to have it in our lives? Every time you recognize an object, it's saying something to you. Sometimes it's just put me away, or sometimes it's you bought me, why haven't you figured out how to use me yet? It's a distraction and it's a cost. The best way to reach our goals is to come up with our own life design that makes it more likely we'll practice or apply the first principles that lead to the outcome we want. That involves solving problems, but before solving a problem, you have to be able to see a problem. The best way I know of to test whether a tool is truly meaningful to you in the holistic mission of your life, or to remember its actual meaning, is to go without it. Then you learn something not just about the tool itself, but about the actions you're prioritizing by using the tool. Things you can't always consciously see when it's been normalized into your life. I talked about this recently in another video. I had the feeling my mobile phone didn't really have my best interests in design for a long time, but I had bought into the belief that whatever the costs were, the benefits were worth it, even though I had never done the math. But at some point I took the experiment seriously. I decided to take theory and test it in reality. What's actually valuable to me that I would want to extract out of there? Was it my camera? Checking the weather, being in constant communication with my friends, constant audio possibilities? Maybe if I identify the things I value, then the costs would be more obvious in the form of the leftover stuff I do that isn't those things. I plotted it out on a piece of paper, but didn't really have the motivation for the next step. But then 3 weeks later, I actually lost my phone. I was and am on something of a sabbatical, otherwise I probably would have been too overloaded with other sham problems and just gone out and replaced it. I might have never done that thought exercise to pull apart its value to begin with, although I'm always surprised to remember that when my life was busier with other people's problems, I did somehow make time to do other weird thought exercises about my life. And as my life design allowed, I had done those things, and I didn't want to spend any money to replace it. So I took the loss as an opportunity to test some new changes out in my life and experiment. I can't lie, in those first few days I felt like I was reaching for a friend that wasn't there. It didn't help that I thought I had dropped my constant companion into a freezing cold stream and I had some kind of moral duty to rescue it, and I did try. But without my phone, I realized I also liked or was in the habit of reading through weird tech news and other updates. I watched a lot of YouTube in bed. I always wanted to have YouTube audio on in the background while I was working around the house. There were a bunch of things I hadn't fully realized I was prioritizing in my life, and also what it actually felt like to have and not have those things, which I couldn't experience when I just wrote it out on paper. But most of those impulses went away surprisingly quickly. Those first few days felt a bit itchy, but the longer and longer I went without replacing it, the less I wanted to replace it at all. I felt free of the demands of this thing I thought of as a tool in my life. When I left my house and my Wi-Fi, I had no internet connection, and there were no distractions to my experience. No one could contact me, and that constant distractive thought of, does someone need me, just went away. I was off the virtual grid when I was out in the world, and I liked that. Maybe it only suited my life in that specific circumstance, but we should mold our lives to match the circumstances that we're in. I used half-working old tablets and phones to cobble together a working WhatsApp account so I could still keep in touch with my friends, and I was essentially forced to do so on my laptop with a real keyboard that I value so much more highly than a virtual touch keyboard on the phone. And since my laptop doesn't fit in my pocket and my old dying devices have no battery life, I also stopped the habit of checking for new messages or updates when I was at home, too. I value being in touch with my friends. That doesn't mean I value them more than experiencing the uninterrupted flow of my life, even if that's just my own thoughts. And definitely not to mistap and retap every mistake and failed autocorrect replacement on that 3-inch wide virtual keyboard just so I can get back to people a little faster and interrupt their lives. I stopped listening to so much audio and started letting my own thoughts be primary for more hours during the day and generate more thoughts about what I was doing. Whatever the weather was going to do, I realized most of the time it really only matters what the weather is doing right now. I agreed on meeting people in places, and we both had to trust each other to just be there. It's kind of magical. What pictures I did take, I painfully did so, but to be honest, most of the pictures I take are just to capture a memory, not to print and blow up on a wall. And it turns out 5 megapixel on a phone from 2012 is perfectly clear enough to remind me where I was and what I was doing when I look back at them. After some months when I was back in Sweden, I eventually did borrow an ancient but slightly more functional phone that I could check the public transportation schedule with, and then I finally got my own used phone that's just on the edge of relevance. And that's when the biggest revelation hit for me. With my series of useless phones, I'd gotten used to being disconnected from the external wants of constant connection and the speed and ease with which a modern phone can actually do things. I got used to just sitting around when I'm out in the world and there's nothing happening. I would observe myself or practice weird things like breathing consciously instead of reflexively taking this quick hit device out of my pocket the first chance I got. I remind you I got that experience because my previous phones were so limited I really had no choice. Limits are extremely useful features of a good design. It was a few days after I got this actually functional phone, limits removed, and I could return to using it as I would have previously been accustomed to, that I got this moment of shocking clarity. I was picking up a pizza, and when I sat down to wait, I had thought, I have this phone that can do things now, and I don't have anything to do. I'll do something with it, even though I don't have anything I myself actually want or need. I flipped through a few apps looking for something to grab my attention, and then pulled up Google and started thinking about what I could search. The whole experience just felt awful. I could sense the workings of my mind being hijacked in real time by this thing that's supposed to be a tool for my life. It was overcomplicating and amping up my mind. It was a huge distraction. It was so obvious I was trying to make my life about its capabilities instead of my own desires. It was an aha moment for me. I had a visceral emotional reaction that was unlike anything I had experienced in my journey without the phone to that point. I powered it off immediately, put it away, and stared off at the pile of pizza boxes over the oven and thought about who knows what until my pizza was ready. In that moment, I finished relearning what the tool meant to my values versus what it wanted my values to be. But just because I understand that right now doesn't mean that will continue. The design of that tool stays the same, and the ways in which it's dangerous don't just stop existing. It's sort of like using a table saw. You always have to be aware of what you're doing. It's awful to watch how attached we are to our phones because there's so little chance that there's something happening there that's important to your life in that moment. In the absolute majority of cases, the most important thing in your life right now is right where you are. Things happening in other places almost never matter to what you're doing right now. They're just distractions lowering the quality of your life. And in the rare cases something is happening out there that does matter, then people will often tell you about it. Doing nothing when you have nothing you need to do feels just fine and natural. But if you let yourself become what your phone wants you to be, then you'll never get that feeling because your mind will always be racing to plug back into what your phone wants from you. I'm not sure it's possible to really understand how much grip your phone has on you as a constant distraction and hype machine by going without it for a day or a weekend. At least not when we've been using it for so long. Not based on my personal experience anyways, but that certainly doesn't mean it's not possible. So I really recommend losing your phone. I really recommend not listening to music, audiobooks, or podcasts everywhere you go. As highly valuable as those things can be, we need some time to figure out how to implement and do the things we're listening to. Or just to be in a disconnected state and not be endlessly ramping up our minds with external noise. The world is already noisy. We more likely need to calm down. Although I think it's also interesting to consider how much of the soundtrack of our lives we curate because we maybe don't find enjoyment in the soundtrack being played out in society. I think it's a pretty valuable exercise to just look around the world and think, do I like this? And I don't mean that from a nihilist perspective. I mean it from the perspective of your individual power. We can change things around us. And as a society and as individuals, we've changed everything thus far to someone's design. If you stop living life as a mobile phone, how does the world look as a human? If I wasn't constantly conditioning the audio and visual experience of what I see and hear, would I be satisfied with what's in front of me? What do I like and what might I change? And even if you don't know how to change the things around you, then you can at least acknowledge that you would prefer to. When you see a problem, your mind is cued to look for the solutions. I think it's extremely valuable to resist the urge to abstract things in the world away as long as possible because we see more clearly that way. Sometimes we might realize that there are things to be gained by not conditioning our environments. We're so used to disappearing into headphones to drop loud and distracting office environments, racing city traffic, and awkward situations where people might actually talk to us that we forget there are places we should want to be present. Maybe I'm waxing too nostalgic and making too many assumptions, but I kind of frown when I see people in my climbing gym with headphones on because that's an environment where I know over the years, so many people have made fast friends talking through so many problems on the wall. I'm sure they still have positive experiences and don't always climb with headphones on, but it certainly sends a message that they're in their own world. And unfortunately, it's a real consequence that when you don't pay as much attention to the world we all share, then you affect other people too. You're not as aware of other people around you. How could you be? You're keeping one of your primary senses overloaded with noise. And hey, sometimes the gym is just playing a good song and you expand your musical horizons. Sometimes you share a laugh with the person at the front desk over the music choices. Human moments that only exist when you're sharing a reality. If that's not one of the core moments of life for you, then don't pay any attention to me. Your mind is the biggest tool you have to make the world a better place, so you want to be sure you're using it to solve problems and not just distracting it from problems. Ideally, your problems, because that's how you'll get back on and stay on the tracks of your own life and not someone else's, and how I believe you'll most likely be able to do the most good in the end, so long as you stay guided by good first principles of life on Earth. Lots of things in life will tell you what their problems are, but only you can figure out what your problems are. When you solve your problems, you're more free to help other people with their problems, and you'll understand the problems better. And only your sensing, feeling, thinking mind can figure out when you're wisely using a tool to solve a problem that you choose versus when you're the tool in solving someone else's problems. There are so many tools in our lives that have become our lives. I don't think mobile phones are the worst ones. I would say the tool that turns every individual into a 1,500 plus kilogram piece of steel, moving with both high speed and acceleration at the slight pressure of our foot through our neighborhoods and city and town centers, has done the most to completely reorient life on planet Earth, not for our needs and wants, but its own. If I stop being a car with the specific perspectives of that tool, and I look around different civilized places as a human and think, do I like this? The answer for me is often related to how many cars and how much car-related infrastructure is nearby, because there's a good chance if I don't obey by their rules, they'll end up killing me. That's not a very relaxing thought. Of course, we see things as tools when not having something turns you into a second-class citizen, or no citizen at all in extreme cases. And that's a strong part of why shaping the world around non-human-centric perspectives is a dangerous design for humans. There's so much bad design for the all-natural human in the individually owned, car-centric world that it really challenges me to give much credit to the counter-arguments. But I believe philosophic charity is an absolute necessity in any of the discussions of our lives, and I keep trying to remember how those arguments felt. After all, I owned a car for 15 years of my life, starting at the very responsible, wise, and safe age of 16 and a half. But I'm reasonably certain I'm wiser still today, and I personally vote with my bike, my feet, and with public transportation as often as possible, and do the best I can to live in the world I believe in, regardless of what others are doing. Even if it sometimes feels like the population in some areas is just one. More reason for a positive human connection every time you realize that it's more than that. And I'm so appreciative of car owners that take their responsibility for the privilege of driving dangerous machines seriously. That's not easy to do in a machine designed for the opposite. I certainly wasn't that person often enough when I owned a car, and to me that just makes it more obvious they aren't good members of society. Honestly, F all these tools for a while. Spend more time au naturel. Lose a layer of abstraction to life. The tools will still be there when you come back. You should be more concerned on missing out what your own perspective is on the world than the perspective of a tool. Keep in mind the ancient wisdom that we're not free in what we do because we're not free in what we want. Decide what you want first, and then it's going to be so much easier to ignore what the tool wants you to want. You can take more responsibility and control for what you think the world should look like, and then you do get back a little more freedom. You put together a little puzzle piece of your own psychology and thus higher order meaning of life every time you take what you think is right and make it an action in reality. And if you hold your observations up against some decent logic, then you get a little wiser too. Even if you don't try going without your phone, a car, a pair of shoes, ChatGPT, a vacuum cleaner, at least consider when you transform into a user of the tool how your perception of reality changes. Everything to a hammer is a nail. To a mobile phone, everything is. Peace out.